Okay, thank you for coming along to this first parallel session for the morning on security implications of some of the new technologies. The supporters club arriving late as usual. We have three talks covering, I think I've summarized it as two talks covering how our current networks and future networks may be misused, and then one talk talking more about why networks may be misused. So, okay, wait a minute, no problem. Pause, yeah. So I will briefly introduce our first speaker, who is JP Velders, who spends about 3/4 of his time working for the University of Amsterdam and about 3/4 of his time working for SurfSurf. So, JP.
Okay, hi, I'm JP Velders. Let me see if I can grab my, my PDF. Control. Whoa, works. Okay, so I'm a vast operator from hell. It's part-time. So I'd like to start out with some stuff about hybrid networks, but we first need to start out with how it all started. If you look at how networks started, and basically from a CISO perspective, it was like, something is wrong. Why? Well, I just got a phone call from a user that something was not working okay. Okay, so let's look at the statistics. Well, all the tools we have now usually come from a network anomaly perspective as a diagnostic tool or something that came out of that. So if you look at how we tried to fight abuse, it was tracing bad guys hop by hop by hop. Some of you might be familiar with they telnet it in from that machine, and then you need somebody to go to that machine and look at it, to hopefully finally get somebody in a terminal room and say, gotcha. That was medieval and was pretty evil. Once the internet grew, you got the whole idea of flow-based routing, which made sure that you could get net flow information, which basically told you, well, hey, I can see flows, stuff flowing through my network. I can see an origin and a destination. I can look at characteristics of that. What's it doing? Hey, somebody is contacting command and control host of a botnet. Somebody's doing really funky stuff. I mean, 50-byte packets and about 1,000 per second. That's not right, so he's doing something ugly. If you look at a port, it's just like, what? Less than a megabit. Not much traffic on my 10 gigabit pipe, but you could see something that was going on. If you look at how some people say, well, you need to look at the actual data, you can get to deep packet inspection, which is, well, not something that scales if you look at 10 gigabits, or if you look at what ESNet was presenting this morning. Yes, we're going to do 100 gigabits times 10. Not even the fastest cluster on Earth can do deep packet inspection on that kind of traffic rates. So hybrid networks, where did they come from? They came from, okay, we have layer 3, that works, that's what you give your customers, but now you start giving them layer 2, 2.5, layer 1 perhaps even layer 0. Depends on your definition of layer 0. So more of these sub-layer 3 infrastructure services are used by people. Thus, they can also be abused. If you take a look at it from the network perspective, well, you're basically becoming a telco. But telcos have always worked on the notion of, well, we put in a circuit, we bill you, that's it. Okay? Cheaper, complexer, routed, switched, LiPo services. This is why we do all the hybrid network stuff. If you look at this from a bad guy or miscreant's perspective, it's like, okay, less complex. Much easier to stay hidden. Routed versus switched? Well, switched is much less visible. I can do all kinds of funky stuff without me being detected. Light path services, cool. Point-to-point, high bandwidth. I can move my movies or my wares or my credit card data around without having any difficulties doing that, or looking like, that site in Russia is pretty slow. I'll put in a light path. DWM towards the customer is also some of the trends that's coming up. What if a bad guy were able to have some sort of control about that endpoint? If you're an NREN, you are talking colored light into a plant. What if somebody sends something weird to you, or does something really wrong signaling-wise? Miscreants fiddle with it. I mean, most script kiddies just go like, I need to do this and that. If you look into a history file, you can suddenly see, well, he didn't really know what he was doing. He couldn't find wget, he couldn't find curl, he didn't use links. So something can go wrong. So virtual circuits is what's more or less scary. I'm not going to scare you too much, I hope, but could be. If you look at where everything is going, it's stuff like PBB or MPLS. Everything is going to become completely dynamic, or at least that's the end goal. Users should be able to connect from some place and set up a path, provided they have credentials and such, and are allowed to, all the way to somewhere else. And it should be instantaneously easy to do, easy to use, and should not run into many problems. So people are building their own WAN, cheaper, and after all, if you look at what we saw this morning, LHC is using it, regular research is using it for all kinds of stuff. You even see regular universities or large research institutes use the same technology to combine satellite sites into their own network. So the production use, both for research and for sort of non-research, is growing. Thus, it will become a blip on the radar for all the bad guys. They're using this stuff. What can I do with it? Can I get credit cards from it? No. Can I use it to pump credit card data somewhere? Yes. So, virtual circuits, if you look at the end game, it should be you have side 1. Let me grab this one. So, P1. You traverse a whole bunch of NRENs, and you end up at the other side. So, the actual magic is done by NRENs along the path. The campus stuff is done with last mile stuff, which several research groups are working on. I mean, be it either VLANs or MPLS-like stuff. There should be no problem in getting an end-to-end path in the coming few years. It's dynamic, it's schedulable. Authentication, well, it needs to work first, so people are not going to put in very strong authentication or keep their credentials very secret because, well, it needs to work. Grid services, for example, people have to put in their SSH keys on all machines, otherwise the local scheduler won't run. Thus, you're creating inherent insecurity. The same will probably go for dynamic circuits because they need to work, you need to put your credentials in. I don't want to type in my password every time, let's just save it on the thing, it will do it automatically, it's safe, it's secure. Yeah, with 100 plus users, about 5 of them who actually do security know about it, the rest who don't and do not want to care about it. Logging is a nice example. Where do you log and what do you log? And after the afterthought, in essence, the mean dragon facing security, it needs to work first. The proof of concept needs to operate, it has to work. Without that, there is no business case, there is no use case. But once it works, nobody starts thinking about, okay, and now how do you redesign it to make it actually work in a production environment? That step is usually forgotten, and at that point in time, stuff is already deployed in operation, and you're already on the path to certain disaster. So, if you look at the non-virtual circuit world, what do NRENs or NREN CSUDs use? We use flow information to basically see what happens at layer 3. So we can get an idea of what's flowing where data-wise, so we can, if we get a report, well, hey, this IP address is a known bad site, you can at least look at who had contact with that to identify possible infected users. Or to use it to look at your data patterns on the network to actually see, something is definitely wrong. Somebody doing port scans all the time, or you're doing SSH scans all the time. Stuff from the layer 3 information that you can get. If you go into the virtual circuit world, People will still use IP on it, but it will not traverse a device that will actually do something at the IP layer usually. Because you're going down into lower layers, the equipment will be cheaper, but also dumber. So you won't get any net flow information from it unless you take special precautions, adding cost, which of course is counterintuitive to the it must be cheaper because it will be faster. If you look at a switch, you can say, okay, net flow, IP fix, does it, right? Yes. But there is no layer 2 device that's in actual use in these virtual circuits environments that will actually work with it. There's some stuff from Cisco, some stuff from Nortel, but they aren't really widely deployed. Most of the virtual circuit stuff is done on much smaller switches and on much dumber but much more versatile DWM equipment, Sonnet stuff. Sonnet, yeah, okay, they can output Ethernet frames, but it doesn't do anything that looks at the Ethernet frames itself and do statistics, and as such can output some kind of flow data. So the IP world has flow data. You can see what's going on. The virtual circuit world, you can only say, well, somebody turned on the tap and water came out, but we might have some statistics somewhere that says, okay, he used 2 gallons or 5 liters of water, but for how long? You probably don't know. Syslog, well, okay, logging in these environments is pretty difficult. If you look at how NetFlow works, you can have your core network completely separated. You can export flow data into a less trusted environment where others can get at the data. Logging in a large Sonnet network or a hybrid network becomes much more critical in that sense because you're stepping over boundaries. More and more sensitive information like who set up what and credentials might be exposed. To just give you a small example, some of you might have seen this somewhere. In the virtual circuit world, if everything works as the researchers want it to do and everybody can use it, I'm an attacker. What I'm going to do? I gain access to a computer, well, which is usually pretty easy given how secure most of the supercomputers are nowadays, so you get access. I do not need to get root. I only need to get access to the disk, for example. Be there a large database on there with all kinds of information about patients. For example, Dutch Grid, I know, has a collection of kiddie porn on there. Why do you ask? Well, because they're doing research for the Dutch police, who need to identify child pornography and thus have a data set that they use to benchmark against. So there's kiddie porn on there. Let's say I want to get my hands on that pretty interesting sample of kiddie porn because that's what the police use. Do not need to actually get root, just get root disk access, set up my virtual circuit because I've already gained credentials for that, pump it away to somewhere else, and I'm done. I now have the raw data, I can do analysis on it without having to stay on the machine, without anybody having seen a trace that somebody gained root and used the old style root to get access to the data. And in the end, this works the same for all kinds of sensitive information like credit card data or just moving stuff around. If you look at how virtual circuit setup is currently done, and if you compare that to how a CSIRT should operate, the problem is that if you're a CSIRT and confronted with a security incident that touches on virtual circuits, you need all the people and all the providers on the path of that virtual circuit to help out. Where did stuff go? Because from your end, you can only see, okay, cluster X, pipe went full, something went out into provider X, who then send it either to provider Y or Z or A or B, you don't know. You need to backtrace all the paths. Another thing that happens is that if you look at how security works and how grid sites work, this places a lot more responsibility at the end sides of a virtual circuit to make sure that people who have access to them actually know what they're doing and have sufficient logging so that in the event of a security incident, they can actually look at their data and go and be able to backtrace what happened. Usually, given how grid sites are run, this is an afterthought at best and non-existent in practice. watching flows, as we NREN search usually do, well, it's not there. We can't do that. So we're completely dark and blind as to how could we tackle this problem? How could we see what's happening? What was done? We can only see that there were a huge amount of packets going out, that there was a lot of bandwidth used. For what? We don't know. Something happened. That's it. Chasing this puzzle requires not only cooperation, but also a well thought out plan as to how the virtual security and the dynamicity of the virtual circuit world needs to operate. I cannot stress enough that this is currently something which is not looked at by NREN research, but also not looked at by the virtual circuit world, as to how do we deal with the abuse once this becomes widespread. Because it's new, it needs to work, and the NREN research, well, okay, these are the virtual circuit guys, they're sub-layer 3, let's keep that far away from us. Tooling-wise, if you look at what's there, what we would like to use, okay, we would like some kind of flow data. The protocol is there. IPFix can incorporate Ethernet data. The only problem is which devices can export it. Multi-domain logging, if, say, site A set something up, do you know where the path ends, how it went, do you know which operators to contact? You probably don't. If you look at how virtual circuit path setup is done, or path discovery, there's a huge debate as to whether or not a path computation engine needs to know the topology of every site, or actually that it went through a site. Some say they do, some say they don't. In essence, the end site will not know how the path is set up, only that it was set up. It will not know how, not know which ports it traversed, so it will not have the data in the event of a security incident to be able to say, okay, we had an incident, it went out on this port into your network, and then it should have gone out towards another network. Nothing is known. Lifespan is another thing. As we heard this morning from ESNet, their whole capacity planning and reservation system needs to have an idea of the future state of the network. If you look at security, you need to have a good idea of what the past state of the network was. How was it connected? Because a port that's in use for some virtual circuit now might have been used for the one that you were actually trying to get for the security incident. This data must be preserved, but you also need to be able to look at it and be able to interpret the data, which is, well, network engineers themselves can do it with sufficient amount of time. If you look at security incidents and CSIRT people, there is no clue as to how to deal with that data and to interpret it correctly. The main problem probably is that if you look at how the virtual circuits are set up and how virtual circuits are treated by their users, is that they completely forego any security relevance or the possibility of abuse itself. It will only be used for a certain specific use, and that will always be valid and legit. Thus, if something happens, there is no thought about what could happen, how you should deal with it, or how to even mitigate it. I hope to get some input from you guys in the discussion. One of my problems is if I look at IPFix or NetFlow version 9 adoption is that it's, well, lagging. Juniper only released it a couple of months back for the latest Junos releases. For example, within SurfCert, we had a problem that SurfNet's network had NetFlow version 9 with IPv6 information until we got rid of Avicii's and bought Juniper's and didn't have the right software version up and running yet. So, as we've seen in the real world, is that bad guys have been using IPv6 for 4 or 5 years already to just stay hidden because it's not monitored, they can do whatever they want, they're the biggest users of IP version 6. The same will probably go for virtual circuits. As soon as they can get their hands on it, they'll be using it and will be completely oblivious as to what they're using it for. unless it gets into the press and a lawsuit ensues. All the virtual circuit broker implementations, for example, the IDC Harmony stuff or Phosphorus stuff, nobody knows how to deal with that from a CSIRT perspective. There's some armchair thought as to, okay, we could do it this way, that way. Nobody's actually looked at it and thought out a plan of, okay, what's needed from a CSIRT perspective, what do you need to change? Is it even possible to change that? And is it desirable to change it in such a way that this could work? Well, how involved are the security guys? Well, not, basically. How well monitored are cluster sites? There was a buff last night on NREN, CSIRTs, and grids, for example. There's a lot of, well, discontinuity in the sense of how they operate. CSIRTs do not know grid certs, and grid certs are usually not aware of local CSIRTs. So if something happens, two groups of people will be working in parallel without any communication, and thus valuable time and valuable information and valuable collaboration will be lost. And well, in the end, whose crystal balls should we use? Because virtual circuits, well, they're still in their infancy. I was wondering how many people in this room are using virtual circuits right now in their network? Okay. Have you had security incidents on them? I know of one sort of security incident, but to give you an idea, a large Dutch telco whom I contacted about this, their response was, okay, well, we're the CSIRT of this large telco. Circuits, virtual circuits. Yeah, I guess it's in our product portfolio. Security incidents. No, don't know of them. A couple of months later, they contacted the guys in there, and they were telling, yeah, we've had some incidents with our VPN service being abused by people who got credentials. It cost us about 2 million euros in revenue. What did you do to stop it? We changed the password every 2 days for the customer and send it via email to them. Imagine that in the research world with multiple gigabit per second or 10 gigabit per second links and useful data, for example, medical data on grids and clusters, which are of high interest to certain unscrupulous people. I should be done. Any questions? Or is everybody sufficiently scared? Questions, comments?
I wonder if you have any concern outside the pathology of security incidents for, just general information about the use of virtual circuits. I mean, as you said, it's a grey area. We don't know. There's a certain lack of knowledge there. Are we not responsible to know what is going on with a resource which we're using other people's money to pay for? At least to know the usage level and so on, particularly when these things are given for free. Have we not some responsibility to at least know what level of usage there is there, whatever about pathological uses?
I'm probably going to split my answer in that. If you look at usage levels of virtual circuits and what they're used for is, well, the answer to that is usually found in research reports as to, okay, we've got this nice set of tools, resources, we've used it for this. At one point in time, we were able to get this amount of bandwidth out of it, and we were able to further our computations or improve our research in such and such way. If you look at it from a network perspective as to, okay, can we tell something about the utilization or what type of traffic went through? So more or less the network operations or engineering and the CSIRT perspective, not much is known. Yes, it could be UDP, could be TCP. It's basically an Ethernet path at the highest level for most people, and as such, most of the equipment does not deal with that. It might be able to say what type of Ether type was in there, but nothing is known unless you put something more sufficiently intelligent in that path. But that contradicts the whole idea of having simpler, much less complex devices in there. So that's the trade-off. So either we get a little bit smarter devices or get a little bit less smart, higher devices into that path. Nope. Or I talk too fast, could be.
I guess if anybody... Sorry. Thank you. Thanks, JP. And I guess if anybody wants to discuss issues around that off microphone and off video stream, JP is around for the next day and a half. How much the conference is left? Yep. Or indeed online. Okay, our next speaker, who we were talking about this beforehand, JP said he was looking at level 2 and below. Peter said he was looking at level 8 and above. So I will introduce Peter Wood. I think with a bit of luck, Serge will do, in the third talk, we'll do some of the patching between those two. But Peter, sorry, Peter Wood from First Base. No, it wasn't. That one. No, I'll stay.
As if by magic. Good morning. Everybody awake? No? Okay, good. Me neither. I had some very good coffee here, though, so I'm hoping it'll start to flow around now. What I'm going to do is bring you a perspective from the work that I do, which is in the commercial world. We do an awful lot of penetration testing. In fact, that's all we do because that's what the firm does. We've been doing that for 20 years. And what I want to share with you is some of the trends we've seen, both from a client demand perspective, what people are asking us to test, and more importantly, the feedback we've had from our client base about what sort of real attacks they're seeing. I guess it's important to note that we're not just looking at the technical issues, and I guess references to layer 8 would kind of explain that to you. What we look at is simulated criminal attacks across the whole piece, which means we look at the technology, we look at the physical infrastructure, and we look at the people. So I thought we'd start with some definitions, because as soon as you talk to anybody that's interested in penetration testing or ethical hacking or technology of any sort, we get into this debate about what a hacker is. So, you know, when I was a hacker, I was taking bits of electronic equipment to pieces and trying to make them do things that they didn't normally do. So anyway, that's what the word web says, which is pretty pathetic. What Bruce Schneier says is that it's a way of thinking, and that's much closer to what I think that the hacker mindset is about. It's someone thinking outside the box, and whether they do that to the benefit of their employer or the benefit of society or the benefit of their bank account depends on their moral orientation. And one of the problems we find in the commercial world is that those people that are trying to break things for bad reasons tend to put a lot more effort, a lot more time into it than those people who are defending it. And that's not because the defenders are lazy, but because they're doing it for a job, not for a vocation. Now, I think in this audience, maybe we've got some more vocational people than I meet in the commercial world, so that's a relief. There's even some people who look faintly normal, you know, black t-shirts, long hair, that sort of thing, in this audience, which is good. One of the problems that we have, and we work a bit with the UK Centre for the Protection of a National Infrastructure as well as the commercial world, is that the hacker mindset is being deployed everywhere, and you, of all people, must be aware of that. So we're looking at counter-terrorism as well as counter-organised crime and counter-insider attack. Traditionally, in the commercial world, we break down criminal hacking into roughly maybe 4 different categories. You could slice this pie any way you like, really. You can come up with any groupings you wish. But when we're talking to our clients, I think this is how they perceive it. They think about intrusion-style attacks. They think about remote access type attacks, botnets, and all of that good fun. And then sort of as a separate, they think about social engineering and physical attacks. And it's only in the last probably 3 to 5 years that we've seen any commercial organizations really begin to test their own defenses against physical and social engineering attacks. And still they don't understand how these things actually aren't neatly divided up into little categories. They don't fit into sexy little boxes because that isn't how criminals think, and it isn't a profitable approach. So in fact, what we're really interested in is what I've called a blended attack, or an holistic attack, if you like, an opportunistic attack. What techniques can the criminal or the terrorist use to achieve their objective, not what is the most hairy-chested, sexy technical attack they can come up with, because that's not really what they're about. This is a very stupid and simple diagram, but remember it's designed for managers in the commercial world. In fact, it's too technical for them, but that's a whole other question. What the commercial world does is it likes silver bullets, right? It likes to buy nice little boxed solutions for things. And this is a problem because boxed solutions actually don't defend an enterprise well at all, not unless they're part of a bigger picture. And we've seen this arms race, which really isn't an arms race. It's really a marketing race between the people making sexy-looking security products and a bunch of people who like lots of flashing lights in their computer room. This is not really what the attack scenario looks like, and it's not really what the defense scenario ought to look like. I don't know how much I'm, as we say in the UK, preaching to the choir here, but at least if you agree with me, you won't throw anything at me, I guess. But what we're seeing is just the beginning, I think, of these blended attacks, where we're talking about someone with social engineering skills, with good con man skills, combined with someone who has good technical skills as well. At the most simple level, we see obvious examples like phishing emails or Trojan attacks based on web drive-by sites. We're starting to see more intelligent laptop theft, and even worryingly laptop borrowing, which is probably a bit more frightening, and also in-person intrusion. One of the things I can share with you, which isn't classified but which is interesting, is all of the major banks in the UK, high street banks and the more wholesale banks, have all discovered members of staff who've been placed inside their organisation by criminal organisations as moles inside those businesses. They've all discovered this. It's all happening, really. And if it's relatively easy to get an individual into an organisation as an employee who can then suck data out of that organisation, then of course that's just the tip of the iceberg. No references to climate change. That was a good presentation, wasn't it? That really made me think. I'm going to go home and sell one of my 15 mile per gallon cars now. So why do people use social engineering? You must understand this. It's about, obviously, not caring about technology, and very, very importantly, it's about stealing legitimate identities most of the time, and this is what underpins some of the most critical issues in this sort of attack. It's not so easily detected, certainly in the commercial world, if at all, because it doesn't involve some clever technical attack that can be detected on the wire by an alert administrator and a good IDS. What it requires is the stealing of legitimate credentials so that those credentials can be used to perpetrate a theft or some sort of activity. So in a way, it's extremely difficult, in fact it's impossible for the average commercial organisation to detect this at all, because what they're seeing is legitimate traffic apparently from a legitimate authenticated user, and it completely bypasses the technical controls because, well, those are poor anyway in most businesses. Anybody here not heard of Dorothy Denning? In which case, go back to school and just pick up on what she said. The key thing here is it's about being a good liar, and the problem we encounter every time we run a test for one of our customers is that the targets, the ordinary people in an organisation, don't expect you to lie to them. Okay, you think I'm Peter Wood, don't you? So here's a really simple, genuine attack that we use regularly in order to test the defences of an organisation from a perspective of a telephone-based social engineering attack followed by a technical follow-up. Bear in mind that this approach is assuming that the target organisation permits remote access with single-factor authentication, username and password. So far, all of our clients have at least one form of remote access that uses only single-factor authentication. Therefore, the potential for this to work is 100% of our client base. Given that about, I guess, 20% of our clients have had this sort of test, what do you think our success rate is? 100%. Correct, 100%. Thank you for being on my side. All we do is we ring up, we ask for a list of people who we're interested in. The person answering the telephone on the main company switchboard gives us that information. The only subtle sort of defense they have is to ask if we're a recruitment company. And our technique is equally subtle. We say, no, we're not. Well, we're not. And then we ring round those numbers until we find the hacker's friend, which is, of course, the out-of-office message. If we see an out-of-office message and that's someone we can impersonate, we then ring back again, speak to the help desk, pretending to be that individual, appeal for sympathy, which is the most successful approach, excuse me, which claims that you're working against a deadline, that you have other responsibilities, that you're technically inadequate, that you've forgotten your password or you've messed up your password. And so far, and I count in the number and type of clients that we've succeeded here, we can include suppliers to the UK National Health Service, we can include the key organisations in the City of London. We're not talking about small or simple-minded, well, we are talking about simple-minded, but we're not talking about small organisations. This is 100% successful, and it's terrifying because it takes about 20 minutes, and the person who perpetrates it for us, one of my colleagues, is a social engineer, not a technologist. He has a lot of problem using, say, for example, Microsoft Word, like we all do, but he is nevertheless extremely clever at saying the right thing in the right fashion. This is a similar attack which we run from inside an organisation, where we use the sophisticated technique of picking up a telephone and dialing another extension. And here we just come up with a target list that includes people that have access to important or sensitive information, but who might not be very technical. So can you think of a department within any of your organisations that might have access to sensitive information, but not be very technical? Yes, I'm sure you can. We could say HR, for example, always good fun. We could say senior management and even more senior management. This is also not 100% successful because it raises a few more eyebrows. It depends how well you run the jargon when you're talking to the individual, but we get between 50 and 60% hit rate, which again gives us legitimate credentials from inside an organisation from which to start an attack. Just by ringing up and saying, I work for IT, we're going to be replacing the servers over the weekend, we want to make sure that your services are running properly on Monday morning, give me your username and password and I'll test them for you. And so long as it sounds credible enough, and so long as the hook is in the middle of the conversation, not at the end, people buy it. And my personal favourite involves physical penetration testing. And that's not some euphemism for something unpleasant. What I'm talking about is physically walking into a building and physically doing something interesting. For example, let me just cut ahead slightly. I'm not sure whether you'd let this individual into your building or not. In the UK, obviously British Telecom is an organisation that virtually every business has a relationship with. They provide telecoms, they provide all kinds of other services on the back of that. But in order to impersonate an employee successfully as an employee of BT, all I needed to do was to buy one of those nice reflective jackets, which I've always wanted. You know, the idea of dressing up has appealed to me ever since I was quite young. I used to play Cowboys and Indians and then Spacemen and all that stuff. So BT engineers, not very different really. Jacket like that's about €4. You buy it off the web. The important thing is to make it look convincing, so you also have to buy the boots. I'm sure you're familiar with that if you've seen any workmen. And we start to build a real-world, three-dimensional image of people's prejudice, what they expect that particular individual to look like. Of course, he shouldn't have a ponytail, so generally I have to wear a hat with the hair underneath it. Importantly, you need the logo. So Google is everyone's friend, right? We just Google for British Telecom logo, download the appropriate image file. We use a sophisticated tool called a word processor in order to make the business card. And we also use one of those excellent kits you can buy for making your own t-shirts, which you use a hot iron to iron it on. And look, it works on reflective jackets too. The only problem is that the ironing board is very yellow for a long time. And you're not very popular at home for a while, but luckily my wife is an ethical hacker as well, so she's quite forgiving. And we make quite a lot of these different outfits. We also make the good old ID pass, because sometimes, not very often, but sometimes they'll ask to see an official ID pass. So you just take someone else's official ID pass and the same material as the business card and some super glue, and you iron it together and you put it through the washing machine so it ages it a bit, and easy. When we get inside, this is the favourite tool. Are you familiar with one of these? This is something called a hardware keylogger. This thing plugs in between the keyboard and the computer. This one is for a PS2 connection, but of course they exist for USB as well. And even if you have a wireless keyboard, of course it can plug in between the wireless receiver and the system unit, so that's not really a defense. They're quite small. The average person has no idea what it is and assumes it's part of the technology of connecting things together on a computer, and that's even assuming that they look behind. Now, this works on laptop docking stations as easily as it does on traditional desktop computers. So far, we've never had one detected. You buy them on the web for about 75 or 100 euros. They will store 500,000 keystrokes. And of course, it's intercepting the actual key codes from the keyboard. So we're not talking about any possibility of encryption because it hasn't even hit the computer yet. The output looks like this. So this is, I really will thank you for this. See, it knows when you switch it on. It's very technical. This is Windows, of course, because the whole commercial world uses Windows, because the whole commercial world uses Windows. And Control-Alt-Delete, username, password. Game over. So we do this in the IT department, in the senior management offices, anywhere that's interesting. We arrive as a cleaner. This is a more convincing role for me, you'll understand. The cleaner will be expected to go under the desk to empty the bins. So it's very easy to plug one of these in at the same time. And anyway, it's probably out of hours. We're not trying to get into the comms room or the computer room because that's not of interest. We want to get where people actually sit and actually use the computer. You can see this is an IT guy because as soon as he's logged in, I had to blank something out there, but pretty much as soon as he's logged in, he locks the machine again and goes for a coffee. Then he comes back, unlocks the machine, locks the machine again, presumably goes for a cigarette, comes back again, unlocks the machine, locks the machine again, presumably goes for a pee because he's had the coffee. And eventually, most of this is accurate. I changed the password and stuff. We can see he's an IT guy because he connects to a device with the universal password. Now, I changed a lot of stuff here because I didn't want to embarrass the client, but the client will not be here. So I'll tell you that the password for the routers and switches, in fact, they had the same password for every router, every switch, and every firewall in this organization. They employ 35,000 people in the UK. They operate in about a dozen countries worldwide, and they had the same password on every infrastructure device everywhere in their organization, and they finally changed it after how long? 7 years. So that wasn't difficult to gain control of the infrastructure, really, was it? And this is what happens in most commercial organizations. We call it the Ostrich Syndrome, of course, and that means this is such a big problem, I'm going to pretend it isn't there. And the problem is, of course, that the countermeasures involve education and training and investment in people, and most organizations don't like to do that. A, it's too difficult, B, it's expensive, C, it's hard to measure the results, D, buying all those silver bullets, those sexy bits of equipment is more exciting. So what do we tell them that they don't listen to? First of all, like I said, they've got to invest in people, and that means staff awareness and policies, the two things that organizations do really, really badly or not at all. They need to think about the physical aspect, because right now there is a silo effect, certainly in all the organizations I've visited. There's the IT people and IT security people, if you like. There's the physical security people who look after the buildings, and there's the HR people who are supposed to vet the staff and maybe even train the staff. And in most businesses that I've gone to, no, in all businesses that I've visited, those three departments barely speak to each other and are generally quite rude about each other. And it's that gap between those three mindsets that the criminal can walk. So there needs to be a focus on physical security tied to IT security, and there needs to be an understanding of the psychological aspect to try and get people to be aware without necessarily being completely paranoid. So we tell people, yes, you need to train your staff, of course you do, but in truth you actually need to sell the ideas to them to be inspirational. And some work we've done with clients has involved showing people how to be more secure using IT and using technology and indeed living at home. And if they understand the benefits of some of those issues, they can transfer that fairly automatically into the workplace. And this has proved surprisingly successful where we've trained IT people. At that same organization I mentioned with the problem with the password quality, after 7 years, eventually they decided to do something about it. They have about 200 IT staff in the UK. I ran a series of seminars for them. These are IT staff. I ran seminars on them and things like why password quality is important, how to choose a good quality password, what a passphrase is. I have rooms full of people who administer Windows networks and don't know how long a Windows password could be, what the thresholds are, what a LAN manager hash is, why it's vulnerable. None of them knew the answers to these things because they'd never been taught it. So I would teach them these issues. They would go away and they'd be so motivated by this, realizing that their machines at home were vulnerable to things like Trojan attack and so on, that they would actually not only start to change their own behavior, but evangelize it to other people. And because they're in a position of influence, that has tons more effect on a day-to-day basis than someone like me just giving a lecture once a year. Of course, workplace security is important too, and most people's organisation, when it comes to workplace, is pathetic. There's really no security at all on a physical level. Every business I've ever walked into, I can steal information directly off the desk. I can either do it with a camera or with my hands. I can find, as I have done in many cases, nice little post notes in the help desk environment saying what the password of the day is and stuff like that. It's just awful. Endpoint security is pathetic too. We still find people just walking away from their desk, leaving their machine logged in and it's not locked. They don't encrypt stuff. Certainly they could do, but they don't encrypt on laptops. They've got no idea how to do it on between a social engineer and a real member of staff. And I include in this very rude set of comments banks, insurance companies, UK government, health service, unilaterally bad. Very little or no guidance given to members of staff about how to be discreet. I even sat on a train last year and listened to a guy, you know when you're using a telephone on and typically in a compartment of maybe 30 to 50 people, if one person's on the phone, everybody else is listening. The guy behind me was talking about a hard disk he had in his possession, which he was going to take away for forensic analysis, and he was telling the whole compartment about it. So even security people are stupid on this front. And then, of course, and I would say this, wouldn't I, the most important thing at the end of a process is to have some metrics, and the best metrics is to run some tests, whether those are done in-house or whether they're done with a third party. But the tests that most organisations pay for and invest a lot of effort in are usually, in most cases, almost always technical tests, not combined tests to look at the real threat vectors, the real attack surface of an organisation. Any questions?
Hi. So you work for BT, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
No,
I've never worked for BT.
No, that's not a joke. So, no, one of the points you're trying to make, I think, is perhaps I'll just stand up to avoid the
you get
echo.
a guitar as well, so you get some great feedback.
So I think one of the points you're trying to make is that it's fairly easy to get inside one organization and get data out of them, but many organizations I work with are fairly large, and so the problem is that when you have thousands of users, or between 10 and 20,000 of users, then there's absolutely nothing you can do. I mean, and it's even, to extend this a little bit, I mean, if you have 10,000 users, at any point in time, you have to assume that a few tens or a few hundreds of them are compromised or malicious. So, and it's probably okay, right? What you really want is make sure that you have different level of security, and that's if one of your users is compromised or turned out to be malicious, or that some people like you, but malicious, try to get in, then there is nothing they can do against the organization. So you have additional protection measures at different levels to prevent these people from doing things.
I agree completely. All the slides that I put together for this presentation are intended as additional to the traditional defenses. And I think what the point I'm trying to make is that the organizations we speak to anyway, and some of them are very large indeed, don't have any perception of the threat, certainly at the senior level. And they don't even think about the fact that someone can walk into a branch or a store or a satellite office and gain access to the entire network. So the defenses are faulty all through the onion, you're quite right. Of course it's not just about physical security or about the reality of being able to defend at every desktop. Of course it doesn't defend against malicious insiders. But as you know, in security, the best you can hope for is 80% for each control. Maybe much less than that, but just because a control isn't 100% doesn't mean you shouldn't implement it. So I think, you know, the more that we raise awareness in the general population of employees, the better chance there is of self-policing. And even if that only goes up by 5%, that's still great. Historically, my experience is it goes up much more than that. And some degree of self-policing instead of disinterest by employees goes a long way to augmenting technical controls.
Yeah, so I think there's a common saying that says education doesn't work, but we still have to do it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing will give you 100% security. There ain't no such thing.
You made a very interesting reference to there being moles inside UK banks. Do you think that also applies to NRENs and education? And are there any techniques you could recommend to uncovering subverted individuals within your organisation?
I think by extension it almost certainly does. There are some things that I wouldn't discuss in a public forum, but I would suggest that any organisation of interest, either to organised crime or to terrorists, will either be infiltrated or will have attempts at infiltration. Obviously anything military has inherently better defences. One of the problems we find with the majority of commercial organisations is that their staff vetting is weak to the point of non-existent. And that's really one of the areas that needs to be examined. We've seen typical examples of that going back even in the retail sector as far as 10 or 12 years. This is a flip-flop effect, isn't it? It's like playing Pong, but with real people.
Yeah, Wimbledon's coming up.
Oh, yes, yeah. It'll rain then.
Of course, one solution for there is background checking, but what about then in international environment? Like, if for example, I'm coming from Finland, when we have Finnish employee, it's easy to check their background, but then when there comes people abroad, how do you, like, what do you do then?
I think background checks are, again, just one part of the solution. You know, what we haven't spoken about, because it wasn't really enough time on my remit, is appropriate levels of access. And that's a major issue in most organisations as well, especially when it's founded on a Windows domain, which is about as granular as a rock. So you end up with a problem where there isn't proper granular control of access permissions, that the mechanisms are too simplistic or not well understood enough, that yes, there isn't the right background checking of individuals, but fundamentally the whole picture is flawed from the inside out. What I'm trying to do is raise awareness of one particular sphere of the problem, but as soon as you go through that, of course, you get lots of other problems. If only organisations would spend a little more time looking at the technology they use and genuinely understanding its weaknesses, then they could put countermeasures in place that actually work. But typically, once we get inside an organisation, it's trivially easy to get, for example, domain admin in a Windows domain, which in turn means we can get at every single piece of information in the whole business worldwide, typically getting the facility to do that within 20 to 40 minutes. So, you know, once we open up that can of worms, then we see exactly how poorly designed the entire infrastructure is, and that's another horrible problem.
Thank you, Jim. If Peter was worried by this morning's presentation, I think he's repaid the favour by worrying us all with that. Next presentation, final presentation before lunch, is not that one. What happened? What's that one? Is Serge Droz from Switch, the Swiss NREN, who heads their incident response team. Serge.
I'll try to be here. So, well, hello and welcome to the last talk before lunch. What I'd like to try to do is kind of connect up the last two talks and give you kind of a non-technical approach to solving these problems. We tend to focus very much on technical solutions, and while we do need the techie stuff, this can be just part of the solution. So the way I want to kind of warm you up for the topic is to just show you examples that we see currently in actual days. So what do we see the most these days? Well, they're evil, dangerous web pages. And so, not for the faint-hearted, they look usually something like this. There was a web page a friend of mine who owns a bookstore went on, and then he complained that he got a lot of strange things happening on his computer, and that's a page from a supplier that he buys books from to resell in his bookstore. So that was pretty bad news, and so what I did is actually had a look at the web page, and what I found at the very end of the web page is what you see there on the top page. You see the /end HTML, which means the page is actually finished. There isn't anything in there now. It's finished, but it's not. There's one line, and it's quite cryptic. It's just hex numbers, and if you know how to do it, you can read these, and it actually means there's a little so-called iframe. It has a width and a height of 1 pixel, so you're unlikely to detect it, and it points to some other strange domain. You'd go on and you do some analysis, and what you find is that it actually exploits a fairly old vulnerability that one of the Microsoft products had, and it installs stuff on your computer. Why is this a problem? Well, I mean, in the old days, the hackers would install stuff that would make, I don't know, all the E's drop down from texts and stuff like that. Today, you don't, if you're lucky, you notice that things go wrong. If you're unlucky, you don't notice anything. And so let's try to gauge the risk. As I said, the web page looked fairly harmless. I mean, I would not assume that this is a dangerous web page which I should avoid. There are certain types of web pages, especially the ones that offer free downloads of software that have to pay, or kind of pictures with lots of reddish pink tones. These are the ones I would assume you shouldn't really go, but a bookseller's thing. Well, risk is probability times the potential damage. What's the probability of running into a problem? Switch, besides being an NREN, also runs the registry for .ch and .li, and we thus get quite a lot of information about what happens in the domain business and with web pages. And we see daily dozens of hacked websites just in .ch. That's a bit scary. If I scale this up to countries or other top-level domains which have a lot more domain names, we're talking about thousands of hacked domain names. We also see this when we have incidents with hosting providers that had their entire infrastructure modified, so we suddenly have the same exploit appearing on 400 so-called harmless web pages. And they might be small web pages, something like a family restaurant or the local store in your village you live. They're harmless pages. So I'd say the probability of running into such a page is actually fairly high. There's other attack vectors. Just email is a classic. We got an email wave called the Zurich alarm. Zurich is the city where I live. I'll show you that one later. You probably have seen all these UPS tracking numbers. We have tried to deliver a parcel to you home, but no one was at home. Please print out the appended PDF file. It's kind of strange that PDF files have a .exe extension, but nevertheless, a lot of people try to print these out by clicking on them. Another cool thing is sports tickets, Olympia tickets, World Soccer Championship tickets. We have left 10,000 tickets, enter the blah, 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 blah. Pretty much every format that I can think of can be exploited. PDFs, of course, MP3 files, Word files, Excel files, movie files. And what's the bad news about that? Well, the bad news is, for once, we can't blame Microsoft. And Microsoft is doing a reasonably good job when it comes to securing its operating system. As you said, it's kind of an arms race, but they're trying out hard. The same cannot be said of, say, Adobe or people that produce things like Winamp. And people don't realize that an MP3 file actually can contain executable code. We do see a lot of security issues in Microsoft Word and Excel files. And I once talked to somebody from Microsoft and he says, well, look, all the governments demand that we show them the source code so they can verify it works correctly. We never get any replies about security holes. Yet what we see is that a lot of the targeted attacks involve Office documents. So if you're a foreign government, you scan these source files for vulnerabilities and you exploit them. Last but not least, you also have USB sticks. It's the old classic. We've had a hospital in Switzerland that last fall phoned us saying, well, we really have a problem. All our servers are behaving funny and we have to reboot them twice a day. And we asked, well, how many servers are affected? And they told us all of them. It's a hospital. Well, we went by there. It was Configure. How did it come in? Because they had firewalls, obviously. Well, somebody brought in an infected USB stick, plugged it into his desktop machine, and that was it. So the risk is even higher. What's the damage? Well, just the two kind of top things that we see these days. One is espionage. Der Spiegel, which is a fairly renowned German newspaper, last year had a cover story on it. It's actually quite interesting to read the story. You see the pictures of, say, a chainsaw, the original one produced in Germany, and the exact copy coming from China, and it's identical for every detail is identical except the logo. They changed that. And so industrial espionage really is an issue. We assume it's often government sponsored. Governments do spy on others. I mean, there's the famous case where the NSA intercepted Airbus communications and tipped off Boeing to maybe come in with a better offer. Airbus lost a really big deal, and I think bought encrypting phones since then. That's one of the big things, and especially universities that do research in sensitive areas should be aware of that. Then we have what I like to call indirect attacks. If you try to attack a bank, well, I do think it's quite hard attacking an e-banking system directly. Despite all the things that Peter has told us, the banks have learned their lessons, and I mean, they know how to harden at least their crucial servers and so on. So what you do? Well, you infect customers' PCs. That's the classic attack on e-banking. And because the customer's PC is something you do not control, your stakeholders' PC, the people that access your infrastructure, do this from their systems, and if you can attack them and you give them privileges, you have a problem. So every now and then we get some of these PCs. There was one, that's actually what you get if you click on the UPS receipt. You get a malware on your PC, it starts downloading files, and once you manage to decrypt these files, you see hundreds of lines like this in there. These are the URLs of e-banking systems that the malware intercepts, and as soon as the user has logged on to the e-banking system, the infected PC takes over the e-banking session, starts manipulating whatever you have left on the account. And in Switzerland, we're talking about the money exposed is 3-digit million Swiss francs, which is 2/3 of that would be the same amount in euros. That's not the money that flows away, because it's difficult to get the money off the accounts, but it's people that have access to these amounts of money. So the conclusion is that every organization whose profits, and profit might be research reputation, or it might really be money, depends on internet resources, Web 2.0 resources, has a risk. And the threats that we do see today, they're silent. They're not the noisy ones. The noisy ones we detect fairly quickly. I mean, if somebody defaces your website and writes some political parole on it, you see this quite quickly. Current threats you do not see. So what are the solutions? Well, it's not just technical. Firewalls alone aren't enough today anymore. They might have used in the old days, but they're not working anymore. I'm not saying get rid of firewalls or get rid of malware, get rid of antivirus products, but it's not the only thing. If you want to do something against these attacks, we have to start thinking how the attackers work. And if you look at them, they're fairly well organized. People always talk about organized crime, and that certainly is true. Organized crime doesn't mean Al Pacino in some kind of mafia movie, but it means that they have an organization, they have somebody that's in charge of the software development, they have somebody that's in charge of deploying it, they have somebody that's in charge of harvesting the money off, they have someone that's in charge of getting the money. That's what organized crime is. These people talk to each other. You can intercept these conversations sometimes. It's kind of like in the real world. They're fairly pragmatic. Hackers, quite contrary to us, don't really care if it's a Mac or a Windows system. They don't really care if it's XP or Vista. As long as they can attack it and get a profit out of it, they'll do it. They're fairly collaborative and open. We've always been scared about encryption and things like that. It is coming, but much, much slower than we expect. Why? Because there's no need for it, and it actually also makes it difficult for those people to collaborate. And these people like to collaborate. Why should they spend time inventing something if somebody has already done it? These aren't people that hang in front of computers for fun. They hang in front of computers for profit. And they're fairly fast. That's mainly a problem that we have when we want to use the law enforcement methods. Law enforcement has a problem keeping up with the speed. That's part of the nature. That's not. It would be too simple to just blame the police and tell them, you've got to be faster, because we have the disadvantage to actually having to stick to the law. These guys don't have that, so that's why they operate fairly quickly. So the solution that we suggest is that we have to adopt more or less the same modus operandi. We have to be fast, we have to be collaborative, we have to be fairly pragmatic, and we have to be organized. In one short word, we have to operate certs. Computer emergency response teams do exactly this. We do support organizations in emergencies. We talk to each other. We meet every so often. We had a BOF yesterday where we started talking to the grid people, which was the group that we haven't really talked all that much before. We have a lot of information. Be pragmatic. We don't really care if we don't have kind of the favorite teams and the less favorite teams. We try to be pragmatic. And of course, we try to know our stuff. We now try to know all the techie stuff that we need, but that's not the main thing for certs. So just to show you in an example, I showed you the mail of the Zurich alarm. There was a mail that was sent out that looked a little bit like a mail coming from one of these popular 20 minutes newspapers that they also try to give you before you go hop on the bus. This one claimed, it's in German, that there is up to 50% of prostitutes coming now from the eastern country. I mean, sex always sells. Of course, it had a link in it saying get more details, presumably graphic details. And if you looked at the URL, it looked like something normal, but if you actually look at the full URL, it's way at the end of the picture, and it's some kind of strange domain. So if you clicked on the link, you got to a fake web page that really looked like the real web page. But of course, to see the pictures, you had to download a Flash player, the latest version. People do actually install that, and what now? So we got the information. If you clicked that this is going around, we saw all these mails, and we had partner organizations reporting to us that have you seen this? If you clicked on it, you got a piece of the GOTSI malware, which is one of the big banking malware families that's going around. We did start analyzing the malware. We started decrypting the config file. We informed the affected customer, which in this case is a couple of Swiss banks. We started implementing a monitoring mechanism, and we try, if possible, to deactivate the servers that is used in the infrastructure of the attackers. We also inform other teams that we found something. After analyzing it, you find something in the config files, you find something like that. It's again a URL of an e-banking application. What this malware does, it actually injects JavaScript code into the e-banking transaction, which allows the attacker to manipulate the e-banking session. So what's come out of that? Well, today, this is now a couple of months old. GOTSI is still active. It's one of the most active malware families we've seen. But because we were so quick in actually seeing what's happening, we could alert the affected banks. We could tell them, well, you have a problem. We are working together with them. We actually managed to get the banks at a table. There is currently a handful of banks affected by that malware family. We have bi-weekly phone conferences. We start to talk. They start to talk among each other, and that really helps to prevent damage. As soon as people start talking to each other, not everybody just sits there and thinks, I'm not going to tell my competitor. We made progress. What was important? Well, of course, technical know-how. You have to know how to reverse engineer malware, something you can learn. You need the international and national connections, and that's why we go to conferences like this, why we talk to people. So take the opportunity, talk to people. We came up with ad hoc solutions. We found out, by just looking at the JavaScript code, we found out certain things that we could do to detect fraudulent transactions. That's not something that's going to break with the next version, but it's pragmatic. It works for the time being. It certainly doesn't solve the problem at the root, but fights the symptoms. But it does help. So again, you need awareness. You need to make your infrastructure secure, but that doesn't eliminate all the problems. So you need to have people that can handle these cases, that can handle them quickly and pragmatically, and that's what certs do. So if you don't have a cert, you should be thinking about having one. If you have one, you should start talking to it. And I guess that's what I had to say.
Any questions for Serge? One of the things I always mention when I'm doing presentations where I mention cert is don't get hung up on the T bit at the end. A cert doesn't have to be a team, it can be organising the resources you've got already. Questions, comments? On the front. Or you all just want... I say, lunch won't be there for 10 minutes yet.
How organized are the Swiss banks currently?
That really depends on which banks you talk to. There's a couple of banks who've, and that funnily enough correlates with the ones that have been hit the most by malware, who started realizing that getting together and organizing actually is a good idea. Then there's also the banks, a lot of especially the smaller ones, that just lack the imagination of actually believing. I mean, when we talk to these people, and some of the smaller banks, they look at you as if you're coming from another planet, and we find it very, very difficult to actually tell these people that they do have a problem and that the solution is not just putting their heads into the floor and ignoring it. But the bigger banks are actually fairly organized and really talk to each other. And that's really something that makes me proud, because the concept of getting organizations together and exchange about things that have gone wrong is something we've been doing quite successfully in the academic world. And for once, we really could say, well, there's something we are ahead of in the commercial world, and they're picking up.
In banking, now you seem to have that banks are going to when you go to online, most of them are moving toward virtual keyboard, where you have to type in using the mouse to click in your password or your PIN code to be able to access your online account. Have you seen those being foolproof of not being able to be hacked, or is that technology?
No, currently there is no method deployed or widely deployed that's really safe. The way the attacks work is that the malware does not get active until after you have logged on. So in Switzerland, all the banks have two-factor authentication. That means you either have a RSA token or you have a device with a challenge response method or something like that. Or you get an SMS sent that you then have to type in to log on. The malware only gets active after you've logged on, so it doesn't care how you authenticate. And
just to follow up on that one, we've seen some malware which does screenshots after it detects URLs being entered. So we have seen ways that they're circumventing. They want to make real cash, so it is a bit of an arms race, really. But just to add to that.
It probably protects you against Peter and his keylogger, but
yeah, that's about all.
Yeah. But any replayable key, any replayable password. So anything that is, you log in now, I can use the same password to log in tomorrow, can probably be captured one way or another. When you get onto the two-factor where it's not replayable, you have to get into piggybacking on the custom zone login. But they do it. Okay. Well, thank you again to all three speakers for keeping beautifully to time. And thank you.